Oh my god, that sounds insane. We should do a walk on. Oh, hello there. I'm the narrative surgeon. That's why you're here. I'm going to talk to you about Mortal Engines by Philip Reeve, which I have no doubt not a single person who watches this will have remembered. Because, my god, why this book exists is a hard one to explain. Can you imagine a world in which cities run on giant tank tracks and devour each other? No, of course you can't, because that's just so absurd. It's such a bizarre concept that it should never have been created, and yet it was created, and somehow it just seems to work. Mortal Engines came out in the early 2000s, I think around 2003, which was really the era of young adult fiction that I read the most. This was pre-Hunger Games, if you can actually imagine a world without the Hunger Games in it. This was before people realised that the Running Man for children was a great idea. And there was quite a few different weird young adult books that came out. This was kind of when you had the Darren Shan series, which was let's make teenagers die to demons again and again, and that's okay. And then you had stuff like The Keys to the Kingdom, which was Days of the Week themed magical castle. When I say that, that makes even less sense than this, and yet I loved both of those. Mortal Engines goes, why can't you do Mad Max for teenagers? And to anyone, the answer to that is all obvious, because Mad Max obviously has far too adult themes for young adults. But what if you said, I'm just going to do it anyway, and then you wrote the novel, and then for some reason people bought it? Well, that's exactly what happened to Philip Reeve. So the concept is, after some kind of post-nuclear apocalyptic world, cities have decided en masse that the only way to survive is to transfer the buildings, literally the buildings as is, onto platforms that move, and then they devour, as if that's a thing, they devour other cities to take their resources. Mortal Engines is set in London, which is one of the oldest and largest remaining traction cities, and particularly focuses on the story of Tom Natsworthy, who is a historian who collects old tech. And honestly, that is my least favourite part of the whole novel. It does all these twee things where they pick up, oh, this is a CD, people used to store information on this, and I just think, I felt that was uncomfortable even when I was a child and reading this, so when I reread it recently as an adult, it was really out of place. But I'm being quite down on Mortal Engines because I love it, and I don't really know why. I've read excellent novels, you can see a selection of them behind me probably, but there's something that's quite enchanting about swashbuckling, adventure-based young adult fiction. I don't know why it's so rare. It's the same as if you've ever heard of the Beyond the Deep Woods books by Paul Stewart and illustrated by Chris Riddell, I believe. They have the same thing where when you are a 12, 13-year-old, you want to go on an adventure. And I don't know why it's so complicated for young adult fiction writers to just not give me that, but so many of them seem to think that I want some kind of character drama. I don't understand characters when I'm a child. They seem to think that you want all kinds of different weird things. Tom finds himself wrapped up in an overarching plot wherein the leaders of London are utilising or seeking to utilise a secret weapon left over from the pre-nuclear wars many hundreds of years ago, maybe thousands of years ago. It's not entirely clear, the timeline. They've discovered this weapon that they intend to use to breach the last remaining bastion that stops the moving cities, the traction cities, from devouring fixed static cities. So they've got this giant weapon, or they think they have. Why does it work? Let's go through that. Why does Mortal Engines actually work? It works because it maintains two things. It maintains pace, which gives it a sense, movement, adventure. My God, things actually happen. You read a chapter and something's different than it was in the chapter before, instead of so many young adult novels which have moments that just everything moves on, and other than that, they're totally static. Hey, traction, that works. The other thing that it manages to do, and I don't quite know why this works, I don't know why no one else has thought of this in young adult fiction, what if you just had likeable characters and you let the reader get to know them? Ah, genius. It works so well. You have Tom, who's a likeable character. He's a nice boy. He's just a nice boy, basically. And he's a bit cloistered and a bit naive, but he's interested in learning about the world. He's got this passion about air flight, and he wants to, see more of the world around him, which is kind of what they're implying by him being a historian, that he's looked into the past and he's kind of got enough from that. Now he wants to go out into the world. I think that works well. And you have Hester. Hester should be, nowadays, Hester would be a problematic character because most of her personality comes from the fact that she has a terrible scar across half of her face. I have no doubt that today that would be quite an uncomfortable thing for people to try to publish. In fact, it just works. I think that it is very liminal. There are definitely moments where you feel that they are just falling back on the crutch of she's disfigured and so she's unhappy. But it kind of gets away with it because in reality she is young, so she is still growing into a person, she's still developing, and so maybe she has a lot of teenage angst. Maybe that's something that a female reader of that age might identify with. I personally found it a little bit stretched, given she is so forthright, so confident in herself. She has all these survival skills from living in the wilderness for years. She has all that confidence, and yet, as soon as someone looks at her face, she's suddenly, oh no, don't look at me. To me, that clashed slightly, but these are very minor nitpicks, because at the end of the day, what you have is a pair of characters who travel together, who adventure together, whose personalities work well, who learn from one another, and somehow there's a kind of romance element to it that doesn't feel forced. You know how in a young adult fiction novel you have to have two characters in a romantic relationship? Well, strangely, there are two romances in this. One of them works, one of them doesn't. But the Tom-Hester relationship actually is quite believable to me and ends up in quite a positive place. You read it and you think, oh, I'm quite happy that they got together, and then you reflect that you're a 25-year-old man sitting on your sofa and you're reading a book for children. Fuck. So the second relationship in Mortal Engines, which is to me a lot less successful, is the relationship between Katherine Valentine, who is this daughter of like an aristocrat adventurer character, the same Valentine who Tom was kicked out of London by. She, for some reason, it decides that what it needs to do is intersplice all the interesting stuff where Tom and Hester are exploring this world. They're running away from Shrike, who's it's Terminator, isn't it? I've just realised it's Terminator. It's if you crossed Mad Max with Terminator for children. That's what this book is. So you've got Hester, who is obviously Sarah Connor, is running away from the Terminator, which is Shrike. Tom's there too. And then every chapter that you read of that, you're being exposed to this new open world. You're seeing slaver cities, and you're seeing, God, so many different things. You're seeing flying cities and underground cities and all this stuff, all these different traction cities that are just fascinating and you want to learn more about. And then they go, that's all well and good. Wouldn't you like to go back to London and follow a little girl moping around? And you go, no, that's not what I'm here for. And then it takes you back and it makes you follow Katherine Valentine, who honestly is a fine character. There's not an issue with her being in the novel. There's an issue with just this smash cut from, running away from a robot bounty hunter through a swamp full of radioactive sludge. And you're like, damn, that's what I want to be. To then going, oh, Katherine Valentine's moping around the museum again. And you go, please. But the point I wanted to make about her, she has this extremely forced relationship with an engineer type. So the city of London is broken into different classes. So there's engineers and there's, what are they like, historians, and there's, I think, a navigator class, all kinds of things. The only ones that matter are the engineers and the historians. So I don't really know why they added so many. But the point is, she meets this guy who's kind of like a slave almost. He's works in the underground of the city, the dirty furnaces and the sewage tanks, all these horrible places. She initially uses him to try to get information about what the engineers are doing, and then apparently that leads into a kind of romantic feeling, which to me came out of nowhere. And you're reading it and you think, oh, this is a bit. It's got a bit of a sort of post-colonial vibe, and I don't quite like it. It's a bit odd. It's a bit like this quaint lady has sort of. She's not a lady, obviously. She's a child. She's like 15. Is that a child? Fact check that. It's like she's picked up this savage, but it's like Pretty Woman, but that's weird, isn't it? That's weird. It's Pretty Woman plus Terminator plus Mad Max. That doesn't work. So she picks up this engineer boy and she tries to take him to be a historian instead, where it's all nice and clean. The world she's used to, kind of denying his past, bit odd. And their relationship ultimately is a load of rubbish. And I'm very glad spoiler alert, I'm glad that both of those characters died, because oh my god, they are not necessary. Just give me swashbuckling. Take out the pretty woman, just give me Mad Max and Terminator, because I love Mad Max and I love Terminator, and if there's more Mad Max and Terminator in anything, I'm entirely happy about that. Now, the point I actually wanted to raise with Mortal Engines, the reason why it may be in some people's collective consciousness, is actually that a film came out in 2018. Absolute flop at the box office, as I think that's probably more familiar to people than the original novel. I've watched it. It's not bad. It's nowhere near as bad as I thought it was going to be. There's definitely bad elements to it. My goodness, the amount of flashbacks that go on in that film. It's about 2.5 hours long, and I think half of it is remembering things. That does not work for me. It does capture the Mad Max visuals, which I've really enjoyed. The CG of the actual traction cities really works. I mean, you get a sense... It's a ridiculous concept, which I said at the start of this, whatever this is. You got that sense that they were vast and that they were dirty and that they were old. This is not like a nice, clean... This is not like a kind of sci-fi future. This is a steampunk world. These are dirty, great polluting beasts that are travelling the last vestiges of a world ravaged by sickness and radiation and on the brink of death. You get this real feeling that that this is not a situation that can continue, that all of this world as is about to collapse, which maybe gives some of the poignancy to Tom and Hester's struggle to survive. That's probably why, thinking about it, it works so well, because the microcosm of their life is a metaphor for the survival of the traction cities. And that to me also is why the Katherine parts don't work, because what she feels like is that she wants to continue the world as is, but you know that it can't. Now, the point about the film, my god, the Tom in it is fine, the Hester in it is fine, but she should have looked far more disfigured. I mean, it is meant to be a plot point that she is hideous. She knows she's hideous. This is not like everyone tells her that, but inside she's beautiful. No, she is quite nasty. I think she kills several people in the novel. I can't remember how many. She's violent and she is rude and she is crass, but she has this strength of character that you end up admiring. And I think that I would say that they do capture that. But fundamentally, if you went in and you watched that film and you hadn't read the book, I don't think you'd be disappointed. I do think the flashbacks are taking an inordinate amount of piss. I mean, they haven't just taken the piss, they've bloody attached someone to a piss-taking machine. You know, this is industrial piss-taking on a level unseen by civilised society. I think that Mortal Engines is not a novel, it is not a story, it is a series of very striking images connected by moments of character development. At no point was I reading this and thinking, oh, I really care about the fate of London, or I care about the fate of Batmank Gompa, the shield wall city that separates the traction cities to the static cities. I never cared about the plot. I never really cared about the world, strangely, because it felt like you had everything. I didn't need to question why the world had come to be this way, because you can already see the series of events that had led to it, because it is such a specific way the world has become. You know that most of the world must have been ravaged by nuclear war, because they talk about radioactive swamps, and they talk about the fact that the Earth is now flat. So all the mountains have been crushed to generate resources for the cities to be built. So you already know all that. It's a really interesting way of setting out a world. So with most fantasy novels, getting on my high horse here a little bit, most fantasy novels, the way that they maintain a long series is that they have a lot of world building. So they actually reveal things that you didn't know before. The classic thing is they can't actually do that much plot development if they also expect to make a 3, 4, 5 novel series. If they had their characters changing that much, you'd be, by say novel 2, you'd be in an unrecognisable place, and you would then have readers who have read book 1 would feel less comfortable in book 2. If you continue developing the characters, then by book 3 they'll be unrecognisable. And it's extremely hard to carry that on. So what you actually want to do is you want to have less character development and more surprise moments where something about the world isn't the way you thought it was. And that is very similar for a reader as character development. So you would have never seen that character interact with that thing because that thing hadn't been introduced as yet. Classic thing is when you see in heroic fantasy novels, what they will always do is they'll start with a character who has one skill. Maybe they start as an apprentice mage and then later on they develop alchemy or they develop swordplay or something else. Maybe they start as a warrior, but then they discover magic later. There's always that expanding of the world state, because if you just did it by character development, where would any of those things go? If you were a warrior, you would just get better at warrioring. You'd maybe become a captain warrior. Cool. Then maybe you'd become a warrior lord, a warlord for short. And that's kind of it. There's no... Where do you go? What's the story? There's no story, because you would quite quickly hit your peak. Your peak would be determined by your interactions with other people. And the only character development would to kind of turn it into like a sports narrative where you're like, I want to be the strongest warrior, but there's better warriors above me. It would be rubbish. So what you actually do instead is you create this detailed world which you expand on very gradually, which gives the same feeling as what you get from character development because of the new interactions that you get to write about, but it doesn't bog you down in having to change your characters constantly. Why I'm talking about that here is that you have a world which is not particularly interesting apart from the way that world could change. So it's not the world that interests you so much as it is the characters in that world, and that's a very intelligent decision to make when you're writing something which has such a different world. I mean, the more you learn about this world, the more questions they're going to ask. I open this by saying no one would believe you that the only way to resolve a kind of nuclear conflict was to put cities on wheels, and no one would, because it's insane. But if you create such a strong set of preconditions, then I think readers will go, that's fine, and now I just want to carry on with the characters and I want to see where they go. It is the visuals of the film that are so strong. The plot is basically the same as the book, with a few changes that really don't make hardly any difference. If you've not read the book, you won't care. If you have read the book, you probably wouldn't care. But what you do get is you get this sense of scale where you're seeing these vast cities crossing vast areas of space, and you get there's a weight to it. I mean, there's a constant saying in film, isn't there? You're going to carry that weight. If you don't make these fantasy things, feel like they have weight, that they're grounded in reality, you end up having the slappy sword fight bloody visuals, which no one wants to see. No one feels anything when they see that. You see these big cities, and even though you know they're fully CG, you do feel a weight to them. You feel the pollution that they emit. You feel the tracks that they carve in this barren earth. And honestly, I didn't think it was that bad. Maybe my taste is gone. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I am wrong. But I enjoyed it. I had a lot of fun. And I had a lot of fun with the novel as well. And I think I might have just regressed to being a 15-year-old boy again. That's a shame. So, to wrap all of that up, you should probably read Mortal Engines, or you should watch Mortal Engines. There's no need to do both. If you read the book, obviously there's 3 more books in the series. I think there's also a prequel series that you can go into, so that's probably the better option. If you're strapped for time, watch the film, enjoy the visuals. It's swashbuckling, it's interesting. It's Mad Max plus Terminator. What more? If you want more than that, I can't help you. That's all you get. And so to sum it all up, I've been the Narrative Surgeon. This has been Mortal Engines and my opinions on it. Please remember to like, comment and subscribe, as I am contractually obliged to tell you. Thank you and good night.